Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamers Podcast. We're back here. It's been not actually too long since we did the last podcast. It's been we're kind of on a roll here. I have a lot of stuff I would like to talk to on the podcast and stuff like that, or talk about, I should say. But this is one of them. The Nintendo Switch 2. I was trying to wait a little bit until after they officially announced it. I kind of wanted to wait a little bit, like a week or so after they kind of announced that it was coming out and stuff like that. But I kind of wanted to wait a little bit to come on here and make a podcast. But I think they announced it last Thursday, either last Thursday or last Friday. You guys are seeing this Friday, so one of the times that sometime last week, Thursday or Friday. But it came out, and I was, like I said, trying to wait a week to actually, have it come out and stuff like that in terms of this podcast. So we're just going to go right into it. It's not technically officially released yet, but it's announced, so I'm gonna be going over kind of like how it works and everything like that. I'll be reading some articles and stuff, and, giving my overall opinion on it. So it should be pretty fun. It's a new console that's dropping technically, so we're gonna be talking about it. So getting this off the Wikipedia website, obviously it's a great site. It's obviously it gives you all the info you need. It helps me read and stuff like that. So it's a great site. So the Nintendo Switch 2 is an upcoming video game console developed by Nintendo, like the original Nintendo Switch. The Switch 2 is used. It's a hybrid console that can be used as a handheld or a tablet-like device, or docked when connected to an external display using a detachable Joy-Con controllers to switch between modes. The Switch 2 entered development in 2019 with a focus on backwards compatibility with Switch games, which I think is pretty cool. It features a larger liquid crystal display, more internal storage, and updated Joy-Con controllers. It allows for 1080p resolution and 120Hz refresh rate in handheld or tabletop mode, and 4K resolution at 60 frames per second, which is amazing. While docked, select Switch games can use the improved Switch 2 performance through either free or paid updates. Games will be available through physical game cards and Nintendo's digital eShop. The Switch 2 continues to use Nintendo Switch Online, subscription service required for some multiplayer games, and to provide access to Nintendo Classics library of emulated games for older consoles, with new support from Nintendo. GameCube games, the new game chat feature allows players to chat remotely, share their screens, and include footage from a webcam accessory. The Nintendo Switch revealed the Switch 2 on January 16th, 2025, followed by its full specifications and release date on April 2nd. It is scheduled for release in most territories on June 5th, 2025. That's what I was kind of talking about, when it came out with the full specifications and whatnot, and kind of what I'm reading here. Kind of the history. Nintendo released the original Nintendo Switch, of course, in March 2017, which was developed in the wake of the commercial failure of the Wii U. The Switch was promoted as a hybrid console with handheld, tabletop, and docked configurations with Joy-Con controllers that could be separated from the main unit for these configurations. Compared to the other consoles on the market at the time, including the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, the Switch used less powerful computational hardware to keep the unit's price low, but sufficient to power the types of games Nintendo typically publishes. Part of the company's long-term blue ocean strategy to differentiate themselves from other console manufacturers, the Nintendo Switch became Nintendo's best-selling home console, and by 2023 the third best-selling gaming console overall, following PlayStation 2 and Nintendo DS at the time of the Switch's 2 announcements. And January 2025, the Nintendo Switch had sold over 146 million units worldwide, which is pretty good. And then the development internally at Nintendo, pre-production of their next console started shortly after the Switch's release, with the team reviewing the performance limitations of the Switch and identifying what hardware changes could be made to address those. This also gave them enough time to plan out hardware as able to ship software development kits, SDKs, to their game development partners. Formal development of the Switch 2 started in 2019 and led by producer Koichi Kawamoto. I'm sorry if I messed up your name there. Hardware director Takuro Data and technical director Tetsuya Sasaki. Sorry if I messed up on her names. I deeply apologize. The hardware director. While past Nintendo consoles have generally featured a new type of hardware experience, such as the hybrid mode of the Nintendo Switch, the Switch 2 team found that such as developers had adapted to writing their games towards the Switch modes and have felt would not be too helpful to introduce significant hardware changes, and instead focus on computation performance improvements to give developers more tools. Hardware components were selected to balance performance and battery life, along with expanding the console's memory to support newer games. As Nintendo prioritized improving the hardware, backwards compatibility was more complex as to which to implement than it had been for consoles such as the Nintendo 3DS or Wii U, which had used similar hardware to the predecessors. The Switch 2 uses a hybrid of software and hardware emulation to avoid a more taxing software-only solution. The game was particularly influenced by the backwards compatibility Nintendo had also considered Super Nintendo Switch, similar to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System following the Nintendo Entertainment System, but they felt this would diminish the compatibility feature. The new Joy-Con controllers were also redesigned from the ground up, with the larger screen on the console simply scaling the older Joy-Con to match the size, sufficient as their size would no longer make it more difficult to hold the trigger and shoulder buttons. So they include more rounding off the corners, extended the shoulder buttons further towards the side of the controller, the HD Rumble feature was improved, and bypassing the limits of the original Joy-Con, heightened its intensity to levels that are comparable to those in the Nintendo GameCube controllers. Rather than the rail system used on the Nintendo Switch, the original one, the new Joy-Con are connected using magnetic connections. Nintendo had originally explored magnetic connections for the first Switch, but the connection was determined to be too wobbly, and they altered the design to the rail approach. With the Joy-Con 2, they refined the magnetic approach, making the connection system stronger and easily removed with a mechanical release system. With this new system, the Joy-Con now will audibly snap back with the magnetic connection it's made, which Shada said helped symbolize the Switch branding. The compatibility of the Joy-Con to be used as a computer mouse, or a mouse, I should say, was an idea introduced by Kawamoto, who also played games on personal computers, as a mouse control would not only allow the Joy-Con help for replacement of the screen's touch controls, but also when the console is docked, but also could be used to introduce new forms of gameplay. And the Pro Controller was also similarly redesigned for Switch 2, smoothing out the motions of the joysticks and adding an audio jack and two programmable buttons in the grips that the player can customize. There's a lot of technical stuff that I'm kind of skipping over here just because it's a long article, but there's just like little technical things that I'm more or less giving you guys the rundown of it. But if you want to go, you can read the Wikipedia. But it's more or less the same as what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there's a lot of little technical stuff that I'm skipping. But I think the most important part here going into it, the pricing. The Bloomberg LP analyst predicted that the Switch 2 would launch at the starting price of $400 or higher, pending the impact of the imposed tariffs on American goods that took effect in February 2025, which I think is interesting in terms of the console release. Yet affirmed that the console is projected to have a strong launch aided by exclusive software and backwards compatibility. With the Switch library, the Switch 2's price would ultimately be revealed at US $499 or $449.99, which is 50% higher than what the original Switch retailed for at launch, and drew criticism for being seen as too expensive. Select Switch 2 games were announced to be retailing at $80, which drew additional criticism, which that's been a big news. The price point makes the Switch 2 Nintendo's most expensive console ever, and its most expensive console in over 30 years when adjusted for inflation. Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser stated that the price of the Switch 2 was not based on tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on April 2nd, 2025, as several publications have suggested, but instead simply due to the unit being a premium console alongside the three Switch consoles that will continue to sell. Shortly after the tariffs were announced, Nintendo delayed pre-orders in the U.S. to access the potential impact of tariffs and evolving market conditions. Similar delay was also made for Canadian pre-orders to align with the timing of pre-orders to be determined by the U.S. Bowser stated that the shipment of the Switch 2 had already been stockpiling globally for release, but at this point and thus was unlikely to affect the release date of the Switch 2. However, other analysts have suggested that the U.S. tariffs may not have been a major factor in the reason for the Switch 2's price, citing that they are already rising prices of video game consoles and the fact that Canada and countries in Europe also have smaller price points, among other factors. Writing in Aftermath Games journalist Luke Plunkett opinioned, that the post-pandemic inflation surge and consequent cost of living crisis was likely to impact the console's sales. Some fans have campaigned for Nintendo to lower the price of the Switch 2 and its games via social media platforms and in the audience of text chats during Nintendo's live streams. Former Nintendo public relations managers Kit Ellis and Krista Yang commented on the backlash against the price, criticizing Nintendo for omitting the pricing details for the reveal stream, which Ellis characterizes as disrespect to the consumer. Ellis and Yang felt the omission created confusion and consumers had to search for the information elsewhere, thus exacerbating the negative response. They additionally suggested in their response that the price had likely surprised Nintendo and caused internal chaos, and attributed to the lack of a clear statement on the issue to recent changes in management at the company, and the current PR team not having to respond to a similar negative backlash in recent history. The console itself, along with existing ports from Nintendo Switch's design, which includes a USB-C port on the bottom, which also serves as this power source and connector with a dock and a headphone jack and a cartridge slot. The Nintendo Switch 2 includes a second USB-C port on the top of the unit, as well as internal microphone with noise cancellation. Switch 2 uses a 7.9 inch LCD touchscreen with 1080p resolution, which supports variable refresh rate of up to 120 Hz, which we kind of talked about earlier. The system on a chip, codenamed Drake, is funny. Featured an octa-core ARM Cortex A78C CPU, a 12 ampere GPU, and a 128-bit LPDDR5. Just some technical things. This is just the technical things I'm talking about. It'll also support Wi-Fi 6, just some Wi-Fi stuff. Internal storage has 256 gigabytes, a significant increase from the 32 gigabytes of the first generation Switch. Storage can be expanded using a micro SD express cards of up to 2 terabytes. Kind of like a PlayStation, you put the or a hard drive, whatever, you put the extra storage in there, kind of stuff like that. And yeah, so that's kind of just the technical stuff I was talking about. That's more or less it. That's kind of what I was, kind of the more or less the main thing I was kind of looking at, and then I'm gonna kind of be getting into what I can have, kind of like my overall opinion on it. But that's kind of it. I was just kind of going over the software and stuff like that, the pricing, kind of there was some controversy around release and things like that. But honestly, I think it's quite interesting to see how the tariffs may or may not affect the Nintendo Switch release. But I think there's been a lot of confusion on how, like with this release. But it's personally, I think it'll be alright. I think everything will be fine. The games being $80, I think that's just inflation in general. I mean, games are getting expensive. Like, for example, just for a light example, with 2K25, right? You're gonna get, and this is just a PlayStation game, an Xbox game, and I think it also comes out on regular Nintendo Switch. But I'm just saying, for example, with 2K25, you pay like up to $100, maybe more for like the edition, the Legend Edition. Now that's not the base game, but that's for like DLC and stuff like that. But the game itself is like $60, which I could see where it comes to a shock to people. But games have been risen like, I just feel like games and prices have been risen over the years, and it shouldn't be too surprising. $80 for a game is kind of ridiculous, but I couldn't say I'm surprised to see the games being that expensive. And there's just a lot of controversy around that, of course. The console itself, the Switch 2, is it's a pretty good, it seems like a pretty good deal, judging by what I've read, of course, and everything else. It seems like a pretty good deal for a console. And I know a lot of people are going to buy it. Personally, me, I'm not going to buy it. It's kind of a little bit too expensive, honestly. If I had that kind of money, honestly, I'd probably buy an Xbox Series S or X. That's how much they range to. Same thing with the PS5, like $400, $500, $600 around that. But I just think it might be too expensive for a Switch. Personally, the Switch console is like the first Switch wasn't that expensive. Now I'm going to kind of be going into a little bit of a rant here, but it's too expensive, I think, for the Switch 2. I think it would be more fairly priced at $300. No production costs and all that, but I think $300, like, or at least $400 would be a pretty fair ask. But I think the pricing is just a little bit too expensive. Again, like I said, I'm not personally going to buy it. I did have a Nintendo Switch, the first one, and then I didn't really play it too much, and then I ended up selling it. But just because I didn't really find it that fun to play. Now, I'm more of a console guy. You guys know I have a PS5 and whatnot. I'm more of a console guy. I grew up that way. I grew up playing consoles. Now, I did have a Nintendo DS and a couple of handheld devices and stuff like that. A DS, a PSP, a PS Vita, all that kind of stuff. I had a couple handheld devices, but it's always been mainly for me growing up, and this is just my personal opinion, mainly for me growing up, consoles. I played the Xbox 360, Xbox One, of course, played PS4, of course I had. So it's more or less always been consoles for me. I'm more of a console guy. Like I said, I grew up that way, so it's Nintendo Switch is cool and all, but it's just not going to be my cup of tea. Of course, you guys, you're entitled to your own opinion, and I know people are going to buy it. But Nintendo Switch 2, me personally, I'm not going to buy it, and yeah, that's just my opinion. Now, my opinion on it in general, it's going to be an interesting release. I think it's been met with a lot of controversy, kind of like I was going over with, but it's going to be an interesting release. And I think I'm probably going to make a follow-up podcast when the Switch 2 comes out. I might be making a kind of a follow-up podcast on it, may or may not, I don't know. Just kind of reviewing like how it is, like how the launch actually goes. It's supposed to release in June. So I might be making a podcast how the launch actually goes, and kind of if I see some gameplay, I'll be giving my opinion on that. But that's more or less the specifications and the full specs and everything for the Nintendo Switch. But it's going to be quite an interesting release. It should be fun to see. So again, like I said, I'll probably make a follow-up podcast when it actually comes out. But that's more or less what the Switch 2 is. Again, with the specs and everything, it all got released. So I was trying to wait a little bit till after the announcement and whatnot. But yeah, that's it. That'll do it for today's podcast. I got a lot more stuff I want to talk about in terms of the podcast itself. I got some other stuff I'm going to come on here and talk about in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, leave a comment down below. What you guys think of the Switch 2? Are you going to buy it? Do you think the games are too expensive? Do you think the console itself is too expensive for what you're getting? All that stuff, good stuff. Leave in the comments down below. Be very interested to hear because this is such a good topic to talk about, especially in terms of the podcast and stuff, a new console releasing and whatnot. So yeah, it's leave a comment down below with all that stuff, and along with that, be sure to subscribe for more content, like the all good stuff, Discord, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter. Link in the description. Got a lot of stuff coming. Posting on all the socials and whatnot. That's the usual stuff posting on there. Be sure to follow that stuff. And yeah, Discord's doing good. Everything's doing good. And yeah, with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Stay tuned for big stuff.